What Chuka didn't know, what no one knew, was that her son was a man who had built his own empire from the ground up. A man who valued respect, kindness, and dignity above all. A man who would never stand by and let his mother be treated this way. As the office went back to its normal rhythm, one thought echoed in Mama Ngozi's mind: Chuka will regret this. She didn't need to say anything. Her son would make sure that Chuka understood what true power and respect really were. And so, the stage was set. The arrogant billionaire's son had no idea that his cruelty would soon lead him down a path he couldn't control. The consequences of his actions were about to unfold, and nothing could stop it. It wasn't long before word of the incident spread through the office like wildfire. The office workers, too scared to speak up at the time, whispered among themselves. They had seen everything, but no one dared challenge Chuka, not even when they knew he was wrong. They all feared the power he wielded, the name of his father that hovered like a shadow over every decision he made. No one knew that Mama Ngozi was more than just an old woman. No one but the son who had built his life from the ground up, away from the shadows of his wealthy family. Mama Ngozi had returned to her small humble home that evening, her body aching, her pride bruised. She sat in silence, her eyes downcast, thinking of her son. She had raised him alone, with nothing but hard work and sacrifice. She had kept him away from the lavish life of his father, teaching him the values of humility, respect, and honesty. He was a man who had learned to stand on his own feet, a man who would never allow injustice to stand in his way. Her son, Emeka, was the type of man who never sought the spotlight. He worked quietly, built his wealth from scratch, and always stayed grounded despite his success. He had known hardship, the kind that shaped a person's soul and forged strength in the face of adversity. When Mama Ngozi's phone rang that evening, it was his voice on the other end. "Mama," Emeka's voice was warm but firm. "Is everything okay? I've been hearing strange things." Mama Ngozi's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to tell her son what had happened. But she knew there was no hiding the truth from him. He would find out sooner or later. "It's nothing, Emeka," she said softly, trying to brush off the pain. "Just a little accident at the office." "Accident?" Emeka's voice tightened. "What happened, Mama?" With a deep breath, Mama Ngozi recounted the events of the day, how Chuka had kicked her, how the humiliation had stung more than the physical pain. She told him everything, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. She didn't tell him for sympathy, but because she knew her son needed to know the truth. Emeka's silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. He listened carefully to every word, every detail. The anger in his heart began to build. His mother had been the most important person in his life. She had given him everything she had, and to hear that someone, especially Chuka, could treat her this way, it cut deeper than any wound. "I'm going to deal with this," Emeka said, his voice low, almost cold. "Stay home, Mama. I'll take care of everything." Mama Ngozi's heart sank. She knew her son, knew that when he said he would handle something, it meant no one was safe from his wrath. Emeka had never been one to let things slide, especially when it came to family. He wasn't going to let Chuka's actions go unpunished, no matter who he was. The next morning, Emeka walked into his office. His company was thriving, but today, his mind was consumed with one thought: Chuka. As Emeka entered the boardroom, his employees could feel the shift in the atmosphere. There was something different about him today. He wasn't the usual calm, collected businessman. There was an edge to him, a quiet storm building behind his eyes. His assistant, a young woman named Clara, noticed the tension in the air. "Is everything all right, Mr. Emeka?" she asked tentatively. Emeka turned to her, his jaw clenched. "Where is Chuka?" Clara blinked, surprised by the sudden change in his tone. "He's in the conference room, sir. Do you need something from him?" Without responding, Emeka strode toward the conference room, his steps purposeful. His mind was clear now. The time for words was over. It was time for Chuka to learn a lesson he would never forget. As he entered the room, Chuka looked up from his phone, startled to see Emeka standing there. Emeka's presence filled the room, his energy commanding immediate attention. "What's going on, Emeka?" Chuka's voice was dismissive, as if his father's wealth and name could protect him from whatever came next. "Sit down, Chuka," Emeka said, his voice cold but controlled. Chuka, still unaware of the storm that was coming, hesitated but eventually took his seat. Emeka didn't waste time. He slammed the folder in his hand onto the table, the sound sharp and echoing. You think you can get away with treating people like that, don't you? Emeka's words were measured, but they carried an intensity that made Chuka uncomfortable. You think you can kick someone who's done nothing but help out of kindness? Chuka's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Emeka leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. You kicked my mother yesterday. And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're my father's son. No one touches her like that. Chuka's face paled. Your mother? She was just a cleaner. What's the big deal? Emeka's fist slammed onto the table, shaking it. She is not just a cleaner. She's the woman who gave me everything. And you've disrespected her. Now, you will answer for that. Chuka leaned back in his chair, the arrogance slowly draining from his face. He knew Emeka wasn't playing games. He had never seen this side of him before, but he wasn't stupid enough to challenge it. I didn't know it was your mother, Chuka muttered, trying to save face. It doesn't matter, Emeka said, his voice calm but firm. What matters is that you crossed a line, Chuka. And there are consequences for crossing that line. Emeka stood up, the room falling silent. He didn't need to say anything more. Chuka knew what was coming. His privileged life, his father's wealth, it wouldn't protect him from the justice he was about to face. As Emeka walked out of the conference room, the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. The punishment wasn't physical, but it was just as powerful. Chuka had no idea how much his life was about to change. The days that followed were nothing like Chuka had ever experienced. His world, once filled with privilege, adoration, and limitless freedom, was slowly beginning to crumble. He had never imagined that his actions, so casual and thoughtless, could lead to such serious consequences. But Emeka was not a man to be taken lightly. He had always kept his distance from the chaos of his family's wealth, preferring to build his own success. But when it came to his mother, there was no line he wouldn't cross to protect her. Chuka sat in his luxury penthouse, his mind racing. The silence of his apartment, usually a source of comfort, felt suffocating. He was used to being in control, used to having things his way. But now, Emeka's words echoed in his head, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He had never been challenged like this before, and it shook him to his core. The anger he had felt toward his mother's assistant, toward that frail woman, Mama Ngozi, now seemed foolish and unjust. But pride was a dangerous thing, and it wouldn't let him back down. Chuka, you need to get your act together, he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in his spacious living room. You're the son of a billionaire. You don't bow to anyone. Not even Emeka. But as the days passed, it became clear that Emeka wasn't backing down either. He had made it known throughout the company that Chuka was to have no say in any decisions. The employees who once smiled and fawned over Chuka now avoided his gaze. They had all seen how he had treated Mama Ngozi, and even they were starting to question whether he deserved the privileges he took for granted. Chuka's phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from his father, who had heard about the incident from his business associates. Chuka, I don't care what happens at your company, but you will apologize to that woman. Emeka is right to be upset. You cannot go around kicking people just because you're angry. Chuka stared at the message, his blood boiling. How dare his father send him a message like that? Didn't his father understand who he was? Chuka wasn't just any man. He was the son of the most powerful man in the country. He didn't need to apologize to anyone, not even Emeka. But deep down, Chuka knew his father wasn't the type to tolerate disrespect. His wealth and status were built on reputation, and right now, Chuka was damaging that reputation in ways he couldn't even fathom. The next morning, Chuka received an unexpected visitor. It was Clara, Emeka's assistant. She had always been professional, always polite. But today, she came with a message that would change everything for him. Chuka, Emeka asked me to tell you that he wants you to come to the company, Clara said softly, but her eyes were hard. You have a meeting with him. And this time, it's not about business. Chuka looked at her, irritation flickering in his eyes. What does he want now? He's already made his point. Emeka said that it's time for you to face the consequences, Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. For a moment, Chuka considered refusing. He didn't want to face Emeka again. He didn't want to admit that his arrogance had cost him everything. But something in Emeka's tone, the calm power in his voice, told him that refusing wasn't an option. He grabbed his jacket, stormed out of the penthouse, and drove to the company's headquarters. As he stepped into the elevator, the cold, sterile atmosphere of the building made him feel even more isolated. The usual glances and whispers of admiration from the employees had been replaced by silence. No one dared look at him directly. When the elevator doors opened, he was greeted by the sight of Emeka standing in front of his office, waiting for him. Emeka didn't smile or offer a handshake. Instead, he simply nodded for Chuka to enter the room. Chuka hesitated, but he knew he had no choice. He walked in, his pride hanging by a thread. Emeka was seated behind his desk, his posture straight, his eyes focused. He didn't need to say a word for Chuka to feel the weight of the situation. Emeka's presence was enough. "You've been causing a lot of trouble, Chuka," Emeka said, his voice calm but piercing. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. You've been living in your father's shadow for so long that you've forgotten what it means to be accountable. You've forgotten that actions have consequences." Chuka swallowed hard, the anger still simmering inside him. "You don't understand, Emeka. I'm not like you. I don't need to follow your rules. I'm above all of this." Emeka's gaze hardened. "You're not above anything, Chuka. You're not above respect. You're not above kindness. And most importantly, you're not above the people you've hurt." Chuka opened his mouth to respond, but Emeka cut him off. "Apologizing to Mama Ngozi isn't enough. You need to understand that actions like yours don't just hurt people, they destroy trust. You've lost the respect of your colleagues. You've tarnished the reputation of this company. And no matter how much money you have, that's something you can't buy back." Chuka's heart raced. He was used to being in control, but now, he was the one on the receiving end of power. His arrogance had led him here, to this moment of reckoning. He could feel the weight of Emeka's words sinking in, cutting deeper than any physical blow. I'm sorry," Chuka finally muttered, his voice strained. "I didn't mean it. I didn't understand what I was doing." Emeka's expression softened, but only slightly. "Apologies are just words, Chuka. What matters now is what you do to earn back the respect you've lost." Chuka's mind spun. Emeka was right. He had a long road ahead of him. But he couldn't deny the truth in Emeka's words. For the first time, he realized that money and status didn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. He was no longer untouchable. "Is this the end of it?" Chuka asked, his voice small. "No," Emeka replied, "it's just the beginning. You'll have to work harder than you ever have to earn back your place here. And it starts with making things right with the people you've wronged." As Chuka left the room, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The life he had known, the one where he could do anything and get away with it, was over. And the lessons of humility, respect, and accountability were just beginning to take root. The next few days were some of the hardest Chuka had ever faced. Every morning, he woke up to a heavy silence in his penthouse, a silence that seemed to remind him of his growing isolation. His usual routine, making deals, attending meetings, and enjoying the privileges of being a billionaire's son, had all come to an abrupt halt. His colleagues at the company, who once treated him with awe, now avoided him like the plague. The whispers followed him everywhere, and even when he walked into the office, there was no welcome, no admiration. Emeka had made it clear, he was to work his way back into the company, to prove that he deserved to be there. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that he had lost the respect of everyone around him. And that was something money couldn't fix. Chuka spent most of his time sitting alone in his office, staring out the large windows that overlooked the city. The world seemed so distant now, like a place where he no longer belonged. His mind kept going back to that moment in the office when he had kicked Mama Ngozi, the woman who had done nothing but show kindness, the woman who had been so humble in her old age. The sting of that memory gnawed at him. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the shock in her face, the way she had fallen to the ground. And the worst part? The realization that he had treated her like she was nothing more than an obstacle, when she had, in fact, been the one person who had shown him what true strength looked like. Chuka's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Emeka. "Meet me at the office in 30 minutes. We need to talk about your next steps." Chuka had been waiting for this. Emeka had told him that if he wanted to make things right, he would have to earn back his place at the company, but it wasn't going to be easy. He needed to show Emeka that he had learned something, that he had changed. And that meant doing things the right way for the first time in his life. The meeting was held in a small, quiet conference room. When Chuka walked in, Emeka was already seated at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on a stack of papers. He didn't look up as Chuka took a seat across from him, but the weight of the room was impossible to ignore. There was a coldness in the air that Chuka had never experienced before. "Chuka," Emeka began, his voice calm but firm, "you're here because you've made mistakes. But you're also here because I believe you can change. The road ahead isn't going to be easy. You need to start by proving to everyone that you understand the impact of your actions." Chuka nodded silently. He was ready. Ready to show Emeka that he could be more than the arrogant, spoiled son of a billionaire. But he knew the real work was going to take place in the company, and outside it. He had to find a way to make up for what he had done. Emeka slid a piece of paper across the table toward him. "This is a list of tasks I want you to take care of. These aren't just business tasks, they're about rebuilding trust. And it starts with doing something for the people you've wronged." Chuka looked down at the list, feeling a lump rise in his throat. The first task was to personally apologize to Mama Ngozi. No lawyer. No assistant. Just him. He would have to go to her home and beg for forgiveness. He could already imagine the shame and humiliation he would face when he looked her in the eye, knowing that he had hurt her in the worst possible way. The next task on the list was even more difficult. He was to spend the next month working closely with the employees at the company, getting to know them, and understanding their challenges. No more hiding behind his wealth. No more walking around like he was better than everyone else. He had to prove that he cared about them. The final task was the most daunting of all. Chuka had to give a public apology, on video. He would apologize to Mama Ngozi, to his colleagues, and to the public. He would tell everyone how wrong he had been and how he intended to change. "I know this isn't going to be easy," Emeka said, his tone softer now, "but it's the only way forward. You can't keep running away from the consequences of your actions, Chuka. It's time to face them." Chuka sat there, staring at the tasks. They felt like mountains he would never climb. But deep down, he knew Emeka was right. He had no choice but to face what he had done. This was his chance to rebuild, to prove that he was more than just a spoiled rich kid. As he left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. His life was about to change, but it wouldn't be easy. For the first time in his life, Chuka understood what it meant to be humble, to put in the work, and to pay the price for his mistakes. The next day, Chuka made his way to Mama Ngozi's house. It was a small, modest home on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the luxury he had known. When he knocked on the door, his heart raced in his chest. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't the feeling of guilt and regret that washed over him as the door opened. Mama Ngozi stood there, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and quiet strength. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him with her tired, wise eyes. And in that moment, Chuka realized just how much he had underestimated her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have hurt you. I've been a fool, and I've lost sight of what really matters." Mama Ngozi didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, her gaze unwavering. But Chuka could see the pain in her eyes, the hurt he had caused her. And as the words sank in, he realized how much he had to make up for. This wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready. He had to prove himself worthy of the second chance Emeka had given him. "Mama," Chuka continued, his voice breaking, "I promise you I will make this right." It was the first time in his life that he truly felt remorse, and as Mama Ngozi finally nodded, a small smile crossing her lips, Chuka knew that this was the beginning of a journey he had never anticipated, but one that would change his life forever. The next few weeks felt like an endless cycle of struggle and growth for Chuka. Every morning, he woke up with a weight on his chest, the gravity of his actions pressing down on him. He no longer had the luxury of waking up to an easy life, a life of indulgence and arrogance. The tasks Emeka had set before him weren't just about fixing his public image, they were about changing the very core of who he was. Chuka's first task, the apology to Mama Ngozi, had not been easy, but it was the most important step in his journey. When he saw the pain in her eyes, when he stood before her, humbled and broken, he realized just how far he had fallen. The words "I'm sorry" had never felt so heavy, but as Mama Ngozi accepted his apology with a quiet nod, something inside him shifted. She had been so calm, so graceful in her forgiveness, and for the first time, Chuka felt something he had never felt before, guilt mixed with relief. But the hardest part, the part that truly began to change him, was when Emeka made him spend time with the employees. Emeka had instructed him to interact with the people he had once dismissed as beneath him. He had to get to know them, learn their struggles, and understand the challenges they faced. It wasn't just about being kind to them, it was about truly seeing them as equals, as human beings with dreams and problems of their own. At first, Chuka struggled. He wasn't used to getting his hands dirty. He wasn't used to listening to people who didn't cater to his every need. But as the days went on, he began to listen. He began to understand. He met with the janitors, the receptionists, the accountants, and the office assistants. They were all just people, people with hopes, families, and lives outside of work. Slowly but surely, Chuka began to respect them, to see them for what they were, people. One day, while walking through the company's parking lot, Chuka ran into John, the security guard who had been at the building for years. John had always been the quiet type, the one who stood watch without saying much. But today, Chuka saw something in him that he had never noticed before, a sense of dignity, a quiet strength. "Hey John," Chuka called, his voice softer than usual. "I've been meaning to talk to you." John looked up, surprised, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Chuka hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had never spoken to John outside of the usual formalities, but now, standing before him, Chuka wanted to know more. "I wanted to ask you, how's your family doing? Is everything okay?" John blinked, his surprise turning into a small smile. "Thank you for asking, sir. My wife and kids are doing well. It's tough, but we manage. You know, just trying to make ends meet." Chuka nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'm glad they're doing well," he said, his voice sincere. "If there's anything you need, anything I can do to help, let me know." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, John spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's been a hard year, but we get by. A little kindness goes a long way." That simple exchange stuck with Chuka. He realized that all his life, he had never truly cared about the people around him, the ones who worked hard just to survive. He had lived in a bubble of luxury, oblivious to the struggles of the people who made his life comfortable. Later that week, Chuka's second task came. It was time to meet with the employees in the office and give a speech. The idea of standing before them, publicly apologizing for his actions, filled him with anxiety. He had been so used to avoiding the spotlight, to being the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Now, he was going to have to face the consequences of his arrogance, his recklessness, and his cruelty. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. The morning of the speech, Chuka stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He looked different now, tired, worn out, but somehow more human. He had changed, but he still had a long way to go. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked toward the conference room. He could hear the murmurs of the employees as he entered, their eyes fixed on him. They had all heard about what had happened, but none of them knew what to expect now. Chuka stood at the podium, his hands gripping the sides as he faced the crowd. His palms were sweaty, his throat tight. He had never felt more exposed in his life. But this was what he had to do. This was the price of redemption. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I know that most of you have heard about what happened with Mom Ngozi. I know I've hurt a lot of people, and I want to start by saying, I'm sorry. I've been arrogant. I've treated people with disrespect. And for that, I am truly sorry." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent. Everyone was watching him, waiting for what he would say next. "I know I've lost your respect," Chuka continued. "I've taken my position for granted, and I've hurt those who were just trying to do their jobs. I want to be clear, I am committed to earning back that respect. But it's not just about saying sorry. It's about proving through my actions that I am no longer the man I was. I will work harder. I will listen. And I will show each and every one of you the respect you deserve." There was a long pause. Chuka wasn't sure what kind of reaction he was expecting, but when he finally looked up, he saw something unexpected. The employees weren't staring at him with judgment or anger. There was a softness in their eyes now, a glimmer of hope. Emeka, who had been standing in the back of the room, gave him a slight nod of approval. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to Chuka. He had done the right thing. As Chuka finished his speech and left the room, a sense of calm washed over him. He wasn't finished with his journey yet, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He was no longer the spoiled, arrogant billionaire's son. He was someone who had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right. And he would do whatever it took to prove he was worthy of it. The road to redemption had just begun, but Chuka knew now that no matter how difficult it was, he was ready to walk it. The days after Chuka's public apology were filled with a mixture of awkwardness and unexpected progress. At first, the employees in the office continued to keep their distance. They had heard his apology, but actions spoke louder than words, and they weren't convinced just yet. Chuka understood. Respect wasn't something that could be regained overnight. It was something that had to be earned through consistent effort, and he was prepared to put in the work. Chuka started arriving earlier than usual, staying later, and doing things he had never considered before. His office no longer felt like a fortress. He didn't sit behind his desk, hidden away from the world. Instead, he walked through the hallways, greeting employees, striking up conversations, and even offering to help with simple tasks. He didn't care that some of the employees gave him strange looks at first. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. But it wasn't easy. Every time he sat at his desk, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. His heart still carried the burden of what he had done to Ngozi, and the faces of the employees who now treated him like a stranger only reminded him of how far he had fallen. He would never be able to forget that feeling, the feeling of being at the top, looking down at everyone else, and then having that power ripped away in an instant. One afternoon, Chuka was working late in his office when he received a call from Emeka. "Chuka, it's time to visit Ngozi again." Emeka's voice was calm, but there was a hint of urgency in it. "She's been asking about you." Chuka's stomach churned. He hadn't seen Ngozi since the day he had apologized to her at her home. He had meant every word, but the guilt still lingered in his heart. He didn't feel worthy of her forgiveness, not yet. But Emeka was right. He had to go. When Chuka arrived at Ngozi's home later that evening, he found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The house was modest, a small two-bedroom home that looked out over a quiet street. It wasn't much, but it was everything to Ngozi. It was the home where she had raised Emeka, the place where her strength had carried her through years of hardship. As Chuka approached, Ngozi looked up, her face breaking into a warm smile. But there was something different about her smile this time. It was no longer filled with the kindness he had once taken for granted. There was a strength in her eyes now, a quiet resolve that spoke of more than just forgiveness. "Ngozi," Chuka said softly, "I've come to see you." "Chuka," she replied, her voice steady. "I was beginning to wonder if you had forgotten about me." Chuka stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had been busy, yes, but he knew that was no excuse. He had hurt her, and the least he could do was show up, every time without fail. "I haven't forgotten," he said, his voice sincere. I've been trying to do better. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm trying." Ngozi studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then, she motioned for him to sit beside her. "You've made progress, Chuka. I can see it. But you need to understand something. Change is not just about the things you do. It's about the person you become inside. And that is something you must work on every day, for the rest of your life." Her words hit Chuka hard. It was one thing to apologize and show remorse, but it was another thing entirely to change the core of who he was. He had been living a life of privilege and indulgence for so long that the idea of truly changing himself seemed daunting. But Ngozi's words were a wake-up call. He couldn't just go through the motions. He had to change the way he thought, the way he acted. He had to learn to be humble, not just for the sake of his reputation, but for the sake of his soul. "I'm willing to do the work," Chuka said, his voice filled with conviction. "But I know it's not going to be easy. I can't undo the past, but I want to make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes." Ngozi nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "That's all anyone can ask of you. Just don't stop trying. Don't stop growing." For the first time in a long while, Chuka felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a feeling of accomplishment, but a sense of purpose, a purpose that he had been missing for so long. He had a long road ahead of him, and he knew there would be days when he felt like giving up. But Ngozi had reminded him of something important. Change wasn't a destination. It was a journey. As Chuka stood to leave, Ngozi reached out and touched his arm. "You'll get there, Chuka," she said softly. "One step at a time." Walking back to his car, Chuka felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't a perfect hope, but it was real. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was walking alone. The following days were filled with more self-reflection, more work, and more small victories. Chuka continued to engage with the employees at the company, making sure that every action he took was thoughtful and respectful. Slowly, the walls began to come down. The employees who had once ignored him now nodded in acknowledgement when they saw him. The small, seemingly insignificant moments began to add up. But just as he was beginning to feel like he had made real progress, an unexpected challenge arose. A new project had been presented to the company, an important project that could make or break their reputation in the industry. Chuka knew this was his chance to prove that he was more than just a spoiled billionaire's son. He was ready to show that he had what it took to lead, to work with his team, and to make the right decisions for the company. The pressure was on, and Chuka knew that this project would be the true test of everything he had learned. This was his moment to show that he had changed, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the people who had trusted him, even when they didn't have to. As he gathered the team for the project meeting, Chuka felt a mixture of nerves and determination. This was more than just business. This was about redemption, about showing that he could be someone worthy of respect, someone who could lead with integrity. And as he looked around the room, at the faces of the employees who had once feared him, Chuka knew that he wasn't just working for himself anymore. He was working for them, too. It was time to prove that he had truly changed. And this time, he would do it right. The day of the project presentation had arrived, and Chuka could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms sweating as he prepared to address the room full of employees. The project they were working on had the potential to skyrocket the company to new heights, but it also carried enormous risk. If they failed, it could cost them not just money, but their reputation in the industry. As the team gathered in the conference room, Chuka stood at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his colleagues. This wasn't just another business deal. This was his chance to prove to them, and to himself, that he could be the leader they needed. He wasn't just a spoiled heir anymore. He was a man who had earned the right to be in that room. And he would show them that he could be trusted. The employees, some of whom had once shunned him, were all present. Clara, Emika's assistant, sat at the far end of the table, her eyes focused on her notebook, while the rest of the team shuffled papers and checked their laptops. Chuka's usual arrogance was gone. Instead, there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. He had worked for this moment, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. "Good morning, everyone," Chuka began, his voice steady, but with a hint of nervousness that he couldn't quite shake. "I know this project means a lot to all of us, and I'm not going to pretend that I haven't made mistakes in the past. But I want you to know that today, I'm not just here as the son of a billionaire. I'm here as someone who wants to help this company succeed. And together, we're going to make sure this project is a success." The room was silent. Chuka had said the words, but now it was time for them to see if he meant it. He could feel their eyes on him, searching for any sign of weakness, any trace of the arrogance that had once defined him. But Chuka knew that to lead, he had to be transparent. He had to be vulnerable. And so, he let his guard down, opening up in a way he never had before. "We're not just here to make money," Chuka continued, his voice growing stronger. "We're here to build something meaningful. A company that people can trust. A company that stands for something more than just profits." The employees nodded, and for the first time, Chuka saw respect in their eyes. It wasn't the blind admiration that had once come with his name. It was a deeper, more earned kind of respect. They were seeing him for the first time, not as the arrogant billionaire's son, but as a man who was willing to take responsibility for his actions and lead with integrity. Chuka moved to the whiteboard, outlining the key points of the project. He spoke clearly, detailing the steps they would take to ensure its success. He listened to the suggestions from the team, genuinely valuing their input, something he had never done before. Each suggestion, no matter how small, was considered, and Chuka made sure to acknowledge each person's contribution. As the meeting continued, Chuka found himself more and more at ease. He wasn't just giving orders. He was listening, engaging, and collaborating. The dynamic in the room had shifted. The employees were no longer looking at him with suspicion. They were looking at him as a leader, someone they could trust, someone who was committed to their shared success. But the real test came when the team hit a roadblock. A problem arose that no one had foreseen, and the team was unsure of how to proceed. Tension filled the air. Some of the employees began to murmur, while others exchanged uneasy glances. It was a critical moment, one that could make or break the project. Chuka stood there for a moment, assessing the situation. He could feel the pressure mounting. The old Chuka would have snapped, would have looked for someone to blame, or would have used his power to force a decision. But not today. He had learned that leadership wasn't about power. It was about trust. It was about bringing people together to solve problems, not creating division. Without saying a word, Chuka stepped forward, grabbing a marker. He began to write on the whiteboard, outlining a new plan of action. His mind was working quickly, analyzing the situation, weighing the risks. The team watched him in silence, unsure of what he was doing. "Let's approach this differently," Chuka said, his voice calm but firm. "Instead of rushing to fix the problem, let's break it down. We're going to go step by step, and we'll all work together to find the best solution." The team nodded, relieved by his calmness. Chuka wasn't asking anyone to work harder or faster. He was asking them to think smarter, to work together as a team. And in that moment, Chuka realized something important. He had become the leader he had always wanted to be. He wasn't just directing traffic, he was guiding the team, helping them navigate the obstacles in front of them. As the meeting drew to a close, the plan was set in motion. The team had a clear direction, and they were ready to move forward. Chuka felt a sense of accomplishment, but he knew the real work was just beginning. This was only the first of many tests he would face. The journey to redemption was ongoing, and he still had much to learn. When the meeting ended, Emeka approached him. "Well done," he said simply, his voice laced with approval. "You handled that better than I expected." Chuka felt a swell of pride in his chest, but he didn't let it show. "It's just the beginning," he said, his voice low. "I've got a long way to go, but I'm not going to stop." Emeka smiled. "I know. But you're on the right path, Chuka." As Chuka walked out of the conference room, the weight he had carried for so long seemed a little lighter. The road to redemption was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The changes he had made weren't just in his actions, they were in his heart. And now, he knew he had a chance to rebuild what he had lost. One step at a time, he was proving that he could be someone different, someone worthy of the respect he had once taken for granted. And for the first time in a long time, Chuka felt like he was finally earning his place. The weeks that followed the project's successful completion were a whirlwind of activity. Chuka had finally earned a level of respect from his colleagues that he had never known before. His reputation, though still fragile, was beginning to mend. But deep inside, he knew there was one last thing he needed to do, a final test of his transformation. Emeka had given him a challenge that seemed impossible at the time. He had to go back to his father and prove that he could handle the family legacy, not just as the son of a billionaire, but as a man who had earned his place in the world. Chuka knew that the weight of his father's expectations had always hung over him, like a dark cloud. And now, with the progress he had made, he had to face the one man who had always believed he would never be enough. Chuka had been putting off the meeting with his father for days, but now, it was time. He had to face him, not just as a son seeking approval, but as someone who had changed, someone who had proven that he could stand on his own 2 feet. But the thought of his father's judgment still made his heart race. As he drove to his father's mansion, memories of his childhood flooded his mind. His father's cold, calculating presence had always been a constant in his life, pushing him to be more, to do more, but never offering the love or guidance Chuka had longed for. Chuka had always felt like he was living in his father's shadow, trying to prove that he was worthy of a place in his world. Now, after everything that had happened, he wanted to prove to his father that he could succeed on his own terms. When he arrived at the mansion, the grandeur of the place still took his breath away. The towering gates, the immaculate gardens, the sprawling estate, it was a symbol of power, of everything his father had built. It was the world Chuka had grown up in, but it had never felt like his world. He had always been an outsider, looking in, trying to live up to an impossible standard. He walked up the steps to the front door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. The door opened, and Chuka was greeted by the familiar face of the family butler, who gave him a brief nod before leading him inside. The house was just as he remembered, cold, elegant, but devoid of warmth. The paintings, the marble floors, the luxurious furniture, none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered to Chuka. All he had ever wanted was his father's approval, but it had always felt out of reach. When they reached the study, Chuka took a deep breath. His father was seated behind his large desk, his expression unreadable. The man who had once been the center of Chuka's world, his idol, his model of success, now seemed like a stranger. "Sit down, Chuka," his father said without looking up from the papers in front of him. "I don't have all day." Chuka sat down across from him, the tension thick in the air. His father finally looked up, his sharp eyes assessing him like a business deal. "So," his father began, his voice cold, "I hear you've been making progress. The project you worked on with Emeka went well, didn't it?" Chuka nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, it did. But it wasn't just about the project. I've changed, father. I've worked hard to earn the respect of the people around me. I'm not the same person I was before." His father's lips curled into a slight smirk. "You think you've changed? That's cute. But change doesn't come with words, Chuka. It comes with results. And I don't see any results yet." Chuka swallowed, feeling the sting of his father's words. He had expected this, but it still hurt. "I've been working on earning the trust of the people in my company, father. I've been making things right with the people I've hurt. I've shown them that I'm capable of more than just using my name to get ahead." His father leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You've shown them that you're capable of what, exactly? Making a few apologies? That doesn't prove anything. People are not going to respect you just because you say the right things. They'll respect you when you show them results. When you build something of your own." Chuka felt a wave of frustration wash over him. His father was right in a way, results were everything. But Chuka had worked hard. He had done more than just make apologies. He had changed the way he approached people, the way he led. But his father didn't see that. His father didn't care about the personal growth he had gone through. He cared about numbers, about power, about control. "I'm not asking for your approval, father," Chuka said, his voice steadier now, a new determination settling in his chest. "I'm telling you that I'm ready to take on more. I'm ready to step up, not because of my last name, but because of what I've accomplished with my own two hands. I don't need to hide behind your wealth anymore. I'm ready to build something of my own." His father's expression darkened, and for a moment, there was a silence between them. Chuka felt as though the entire weight of his father's legacy was pressing down on him, threatening to crush him beneath it. He had spent so many years trying to prove himself, trying to be what his father wanted him to be. But now he was telling his father, in no uncertain terms, that he was done living in his shadow. "You think you're ready for that?" his father asked, his tone low, dangerous. "Do you have any idea what it takes to run this business? To carry on the legacy of our family?" Chuka stood up, his heart racing. "I know what it takes. I've seen it. But I'm not going to keep waiting for your approval. I'm going to do it myself. On my own terms." His father stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Chuka saw something in his eyes that wasn't disdain. It was recognition. His father finally nodded, though it was a reluctant gesture. "Very well, Chuka," his father said, his voice colder now. "You want to build something of your own? Then do it. But remember one thing, you can't have it both ways. You can't run away from the family legacy and expect to create your own empire without facing the consequences. If you want to build something, it won't be easy. You'll have to sacrifice. You'll have to bleed for it." Chuka met his father's gaze. "I'm ready for whatever it takes." His father didn't say another word. Instead, he motioned for Chuka to leave, his face a mask of indifference. But as Chuka walked out of the study, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had marked the beginning of something new. Something powerful. He wasn't just trying to prove himself to his father anymore. He was proving to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever thought possible. He had spent his whole life trying to live up to someone else's expectations. Now, he was ready to create his own legacy. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in his life, Chuka felt certain that he was on the right path. And nothing, no one, could take that away from him. The days that followed his confrontation with his father were a blur of emotion and activity. Chuka had expected the meeting to be a turning point in his life, but he hadn't anticipated just how much it would weigh on him. His father's cold dismissal had stung more than he had expected, but in a strange way, it had also lit a fire within him. He had always been looking for approval from the wrong source. Now, he realized that the only approval he truly needed was his own. He had made a promise to himself that day. He was going to build his own legacy, separate from his father's shadow. He would prove that he could succeed, not because of his last name, but because of his own abilities, hard work, and the lessons he had learned over the past few months. But as he began to take steps towards this new path, he soon realized that success came with its own price. The first few days after the meeting, Chuka threw himself into his work with an intensity he had never known before. He met with investors, pitched new ideas, and restructured the company's financial strategies. He was no longer just a figurehead in his father's empire. He was in the trenches, making decisions that would shape the future of the business. But as the pressure mounted, so did the toll it took on him. He found himself staying late into the night, sacrificing his sleep, his health, and even his personal life for the sake of the company. Emeka, who had been watching Chuka closely since their initial confrontation, could see the strain on him. One afternoon, he stopped by Chuka's office, finding him hunched over a pile of reports, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. "Chuka," Emeka said, his voice firm but concerned. "You're pushing yourself too hard. This is not the way to build something sustainable." Chuka looked up, his face tired but determined. "I don't have time to slow down, Emeka. If I want to prove myself, I have to move fast. I can't afford to make mistakes." Emeka shook his head. "You're making a mistake by not taking care of yourself. Burnout won't get you where you want to go." But Chuka wasn't ready to hear it. He had spent so long living in the shadow of his father's expectations that now, with a chance to create his own future, he couldn't afford to take a step back. His mind was racing with ideas, with plans, with ways to make his business not just successful, but extraordinary. That night, as he lay in bed, Chuka couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Despite all the progress he had made, despite the projects he had spearheaded and the respect he had earned from his colleagues, he still felt empty. He had spent so long chasing after success, after the validation of others, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. The following day, while sitting in his office, Chuka received a phone call that would change everything. It was from Mama Ngozi. "Chuka," she said, her voice calm but serious. "I've been hearing about all your hard work. I'm proud of you, but I want you to remember something important. Success isn't worth anything if you lose yourself along the way. You've made great strides, but you need to find balance. Don't forget what truly matters. Family, peace of mind, the people who love you. Those things are worth more than all the wealth in the world." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. Mama Ngozi, despite everything she had been through, still had the wisdom to remind him of the things he had been neglecting: his health, his family, and his own happiness. Chuka realized then that, in his pursuit of success, he had lost sight of the things that truly made life worth living. He sat back in his chair, his heart heavy with the realization that in his rush to prove himself, he had forgotten the very people who had supported him from the beginning. People like Emeka, like Mama Ngozi, and even the employees who had once feared him, but were now beginning to see him as more than just the privileged son of a billionaire. The weight of everything he had been chasing suddenly felt unbearable. He had spent so much of his life trying to impress his father, his colleagues, and the world, but now he understood that true success wasn't measured by how much money you made or how many people admired you. True success was measured by the peace you felt within yourself, by the love and respect you earned from the people who mattered most. Later that evening, Chuka decided to make a change. He called Emeka and asked to meet him at a nearby cafe. When Emeka arrived, he found Chuka sitting at a small table, a rare look of vulnerability on his face. "I've been thinking a lot," Chuka said, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been pushing myself too hard. I've been so focused on proving myself that I've forgotten why I started this journey in the first place." Emeka sat down, sensing the shift in Chuka's demeanor. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Chuka said, taking a deep breath, "I've been running after success without thinking about the people who matter to me. I've neglected my health, my family, and even the things that brought me peace. I don't want to keep going down this path. I want to find a balance. I want to make a real impact, but I don't want to lose myself along the way." Emeka nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. That's the first step, Chuka. The road to success isn't just about hard work. It's about finding purpose and fulfillment. And sometimes, the hardest thing is learning to slow down and take care of what really matters. Chuka smiled faintly, a sense of relief washing over him. Thank you, Emeka. I think I've finally learned that. From that moment on, Chuka began to shift his focus. He still worked hard, still pushed himself to succeed, but he also made time for the things that truly mattered. He spent more time with Mama Ngozi, learning from her wisdom and allowing her to guide him through the challenges he faced. He reached out to the employees he had worked so hard to connect with, building genuine relationships with them, not just as their boss, but as a mentor and a friend. And most importantly, he took the time to care for his health, both mentally and physically, making sure that the pursuit of success didn't consume him entirely. Chuka knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them, because he had learned that true success wasn't just about what you achieved, it was about who you became in the process. As he sat back and reflected on his journey, Chuka knew that his work wasn't done. But he was no longer chasing approval or running from his past. He was walking a path he had carved for himself, a path that was defined by purpose, humility, and the love and respect of those who mattered most. And in that moment, Chuka understood what success truly meant. The weeks that followed were transformative for Chuka. He had found a balance between his ambitions and the things that truly mattered. His work still consumed much of his time, but now, it was driven by a deeper sense of purpose. He wasn't just working to build his name or to prove himself to anyone anymore. He was working because he had something to offer, something real. He was working for the future, not just for himself, but for the people who had stood by him, and for those who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. Chuka's relationship with his employees had changed drastically. The walls that had once existed between him and them had crumbled, and in their place, mutual respect had flourished. He had become more than just a figurehead or the son of a billionaire. He had become a leader in the truest sense of the word. One afternoon, as Chuka was walking through the company's headquarters, he passed by the office of one of his most trusted colleagues, Clara. She looked up from her desk, her face breaking into a smile when she saw him. Chuka, Clara greeted him warmly. The new project proposal, it's ready. We've got everything in place. Chuka smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. He had come a long way from the arrogant young man who would have never bothered to interact with his team on such a personal level. Now he was involved in every step of the process, ensuring that each project not only met the company's standards but also fulfilled the greater vision he had for it, a vision that went beyond profits and success. That's great, Clara, he said, his voice full of sincerity. Let's make sure we don't rush it. I want to make sure we're doing this right. Every detail matters. Clara's smile deepened. She could see the difference in him, how much he had grown. I'll make sure it's perfect, Chuka. As Chuka walked away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had earned their respect, not through his name, but through his actions, his leadership, and his willingness to change. It was no longer just about the company, it was about the impact they could make together. It was about doing something that would leave a legacy that was truly his own. Later that evening, Chuka sat at his desk, staring out the window at the city below. The lights flickered like stars, casting a soft glow over the urban landscape. He reflected on everything he had learned, the lessons from Mama Ngozi, from Emeka, from his own struggles and mistakes. It wasn't just about achieving success in the business world, it was about how he carried himself through life, how he treated people, how he valued what really mattered. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his father. For a moment, Chuka hesitated, unsure whether to read it. After their last conversation, he had been focused on proving himself to the world, but not to his father. That part of his life had felt like a distant memory. But Chuka had changed. And it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family, and the possibility of reconciliation. With a deep breath, he opened the message. Chuka, I've been watching your progress. I've heard from Emeka, and I must admit, I'm impressed. You've done more than just follow my footsteps. You forged your own path. I'm proud of you. Don't let this change stop here. Continue building, continue learning. The world is yours if you keep this up. Chuka felt a lump form in his throat. His father's words, though simple, meant more than he could express. For so long, he had craved his father's approval, but now, he realized that the approval he had been seeking was within him all along. He had earned it, not from his father, but from himself. With the weight of the past now lighter on his shoulders, Chuka replied to his father's message. "Thank you, Father. I'm still learning. But I'm not giving up. I'm building something real." As he set the phone down, Chuka knew that this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges, there would still be moments when he doubted himself, but now, he had the tools to face them. He had earned his place in the world, not because of his name, but because of who he had become. The legacy of change. Chuka's journey wasn't just about success. It was about growth, redemption, and finding his place in the world on his own terms. He had spent years chasing after a life that wasn't truly his, but through his mistakes and lessons learned, he had finally started to build a life that was authentically his own. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about listening, guiding, and earning the trust of those around you. It was about being humble, recognizing your flaws, and working tirelessly to overcome them. It was about caring for the people who matter most, your family, your friends, your colleagues, and making sure that your actions spoke louder than your words. Chuka knew that he still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt at peace with the journey ahead. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone, he had already done that. Now he was focused on building something greater than himself, a legacy that would stand the test of time, built on respect, integrity, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered in life. As Chuka sat back in his chair, looking out over the city he had come to love, he knew one thing for certain: the road to redemption had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. The future was his to shape, and he was ready to face it head-on, no longer as a spoiled billionaire's son, but as a man who had earned his place in the world. And that, Chuka realized, was the greatest success of all.